Tyler, Joe Perry, Tom Hamilton, Brad Whitford and Joey Kramer are lucky men. Not only can they boast their band Aerosmith is unlike any other act rocking the stadium stages of today, they can also claim to have been to the top, to the bottom and back to the top again. After battling drug addiction and the fickle wheel of fortune for over 3 decades and still surviving to tell the tale, it's little wonder that Aerosmith are proud to call themselves America's greatest rock and roll band. Aerosmith have sold an incredible 140 million albums, half of those in the USA, and have scored a mighty 21 top 40 hits. They've played with every major band on the planet, including Kiss, Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses, and have become the second biggest selling American band ever. The only US act which has sold more than Steven Tyler's crew is the Eagles. As you're about to see, Aerosmith have always kept their faithful fans loyal with a live show that's second to none. But there have been more than enough drugs, demons and deals with the devil along the way to destroy any lesser band.
In the 70s, they really did mirror the kind of overindulgence and the fun that the Americans were having. The teenage kids were going mad on drugs, you know, they'd never heard of AIDS. They were just having a great libertine time. And then in the 80s, it was boom and bust in America, and that's pretty much what happened to Aerosmith. They indulged to the absolute hilt, and then they collapsed. And then in the 90s, there they were, teetotalers. This is just the time it seemed that everybody in America was entering the AA 12 steps.
No other band has had quite such a ride, I don't think. And also it's hard to think of another band with quite the same longevity that Aerosmith have had in that process. Also, I think they encapsulate so many staples of music: rock, metal, R&B, blues, soul, even rap. But it's all done seamlessly.
Although Aerosmith now have a fan base nicknamed the Blue Army, which includes over 1 million members, their status wasn't always so high profile. They began their career on the Boston, Massachusetts club circuit after the 5 musicians came together in the late 1960s. Although they became known as the Bad Boys from Boston, none of them were born in the city. Steven Tyler, a New Yorker whose real name is Steven Tallarico, had met guitarist Joe Perry and bassist Tom Hamilton in New Hampshire. The trio recruited drummer Joey Kramer after the move to Boston in 1970. After a few months with a guitarist named Ray Tabano, Brad Whitford joined the band and the classic Aerosmith lineup was complete.
Come together right now over me.
They were huge Beatles fans and huge fans of the English sound, if you like, Zeppelin, the Stones and all of that. But they were also, Stephen and Joe were big blues fans, and Delta bluesmen and all that, you know, they were into all of that Mississippi Delta stuff. And that showed in the music. So they were determined to make the music that they wanted to make, rather than sort of hunt for a hit.
You talk to Aerosmith about it, you know, they don't pretend to be wildly original. What they are fans who've actually done it themselves and, you know, added their own lick of paint.
The chicken little tells you that the sky is falling. Even if it wasn't, would you still come crawling back again? I bet you would, my friend. Again.
Right from the start, it was obvious that Tyler and Perry were the true stars of the band. The singer, who'd been a drummer for many years, was a bolt of lightning on stage, a one-man explosion of energy and showmanship whose swagger resembled a hybrid of Mick Jagger, James Brown and Rod Stewart. Joe Perry, meanwhile, pioneered the laid-back guitar slinger image that Slash of Guns N' Roses would later make his own.
Tyler and Perry pretty much complement each other perfectly. You can really sum it up that Joe is the rock to Steven's roll.
It's that whole fire and ice yin and yang thing. They fire off each other, even though they don't often see eye to eye, and there can be quite a lot of friction there. the fact remains that without the other, they are vastly reduced.
By 1972, Aerosmith had built a local fan base in the Massachusetts area and signed to Columbia Records. The following year, their self-titled debut album was released, and the die was cast.
Aerosmith's debut album kind of snuck out, and I don't think many people really took too much notice of it at the time, outside of their hometown of Boston, really. It took the single Dream On, really, to kind of catapult them into their sort of fame module, so to speak.
If my life's books, written pages, never learned from fools and from sages, you know it's true. All the things you do come back to you.
America needed a Rolling Stones of their own. They needed a homegrown Rolling Stones, but they still needed a little bit of convincing. And they managed to convince them a bit with the hit single, which was Dream On, the ballad, which, you know, actually got them noticed.
Dream on, a dream on, a dream on, dream until your dreams come true.
Dream On was a very important single for them. It was the first of their massive ballads, and they do occasionally still play it because people like to hear it, and it's part of their history. The other one from that era is Mummikin, which was probably the best of the songs on the first album. It was very much a proto Aerosmith, and it's a good rocker.
Keep it down, mama kid. Tell us where you gonna be. Living on some fantasy. Sleeping that sucking wind.
Dream On, which is a very aspirational, very American thing, you know, dream on until your dreams come true. You know, it's a whole American ethic, isn't it, really? So on the one hand, you've got that very wafty ballad, and then you've got Mummikin, which is like the supreme strutting rhythm and blues Aerosmith that we know and love.
Get it easy, live like you wanna. No, it's so hard to find peace. Well, I see it, gotta say shit, but don't forget to drop me a line.
Riding a wave of popularity, Aerosmith toured the world and recorded another album, Get Your Wings, in 1974.
When on a train, a metal dame, she rather handsome, what kind of love to say, but she was pretty, from New York City, walking down Bell of the Heat, and how about just couldn't tell her so. So the train kept rolling all night long, 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 the heat, and how about just couldn't tell her.
Get Your Wings kind of consolidated the band's rock and raunch, really. Has some great tracks on it. Train Kept A-Rolling, great cover version. Early example of Tyler's innuendos, Lord of the Thighs. So, you know, it was Aerosmith really finding their way, I think. I don't think it was a quantum leap from the debut, but it was a slight notch upward.
The album included a storming cover of the R&B standard Train Kept A-Rollin', which they still do deliver now and again. And they supported the album vociferously on the road. They hit the road yet again, and this time they were supporting bands of the status of Sabbath and Deep Purple. So it was just a very rapid learning curve.
You can see what a great live band they were just by listening to Train Kept A-Rolling, you know. It's a great snapshot of America's great homegrown bar band kicking ass in, you know, to the nth degree.
Their fan base grew month by month, and the band was soon elevated to the status of megastars. Their lifestyles changed accordingly, with drugs and groupies now part and parcel of life on the road in Aerosmith. At this point in their careers, however, the band's on-the-road partying wasn't yet preventing them from writing great music. In 1975, they released the classic Toys in the Attic, which showed once and for all that Aerosmith were no mere Rolling Stones copyists.
This one really was the album that sort of blew the doors off for Aerosmith. Their rise up until that point had been slow and steady. The media very keen to write them off again as Stones copyists. But by the time they did their third album, people had started to realise that they were the real thing. And also by the time they did Toys in the Attic, they had a really good set of songs on that particular album, which they backed up live fantastically well.
Toys in the Attic's title track really sounds how the band looked in the photographs. You know, when you see Steven Tyler with his stripy costume just, you know, ripped down to his crotch, and he's got all his scarves wrapped around the microphone, he's got all his girls, like, you know, with their more leg than a bucket of chicken and all this stuff going on. You hear Toys in the Attic and that sounds like the photograph you're looking at.
It wasn't at that stage where they were getting costumes designed or anything. Obviously somebody made them for them. I don't know where he got the stripy suit from. But yeah, the clothes are important, but there was this rock and roll gypsy thing, this vagabond look that everybody had, you know. And also you wanted to be like your peers, you know, so it evolved. I don't know where it came from.
Toys in the Attic featured two key songs, Sweet Emotion, which remains an important feature of Aerosmith's live set to this day, and Walk This Way, which would be crucial for the band's career, not once, but twice.
Sweet Emotion is a standout track in a strange way, because it's actually Steven Tyler's way of expressing his slight disenchantment with the way things were going in the band at that point. It's actually directed, I think, at Joe Perry and his girlfriend. I think she was about to become his wife at that point, Lisa, and the fracturing of the relationship between Tyler and Perry as a result.
Things I can show understand. 'Cause a month on the road, I'll be coming in your hand.
It's classic Aerosmith. It's got a kind of a lazy kind of stoner vibe, but it does take on. It's got its own fire and poise and a hook that everyone can sing very easily.
Toys in the Attic was an incredible album. You know, it had Walk This Way on it, for God's sake. You know, it was changing the whole face of what rock music could be.
It was a typical Aerosmith track with a stuttering riff, with some powerful Tyler vocals, you know, and a great deal of attitude.
You had the big rock payoff, the sort of scream out loud chorus. The verses were almost like a quirky blues feel, with Tyler almost rapping. Blues and rap being both forms of music that owe their origins to black artists. So not really a great leap of imagination to understand how it was that Run DMC eventually came to cover that song in the mid-80s.
I think anybody could have predicted how important it would have been in the future, in the fusion of rock and rap, and the way it would project Aerosmith's career as well as Run DMC's, and kind of form a whole new, you know, little pocket of music that was subsequently taken over by Faith No More, for example, and people like that. So, no, I don't think anybody could have pinpointed that track at the time, Walk This Way, and said, "Ah, no, that's going to, you know, create a whole new fusion of rock and hip hop."
Well, just give me some head. Oh, baby, you know what I'm talking about.
In 1976, it was becoming clear that Aerosmith were at a commercial peak. The enormous success of Toys in the Attic, which sold an astonishing 8 million copies, was followed up by the Rocks album in 1976.
At the time they wrote the songs on Rocks and recorded the songs on Rocks and toured those songs, it was the pinnacle for them. All the planets had aligned, shall we say. The drugs had yet to split them up. The drugs were happening, but they had yet to really affect them in a detrimental fashion.
Despite the two huge successes of Toys in the Attic and Rocks, the rest of the 1970s was less productive for Aerosmith. Their songwriting was starting to sound a little old-fashioned as clubbers were now listening to disco and punk, while new wave and hip-hop had also begun to make their presence felt. An additional problem was the fact that the band members had begun to disagree, especially Tyler and Perry, whose intense creative relationship often spilled over into resentment and frustration. The next album, Draw the Line, suffered because of this and the fact that the band's drug use was threatening to engulf them.
Checkmate, honey, need you at your own damn game. Yeah. I said no dice, honey, I'm living on the astral plane.
Draw the Line was something of a come down after the Twin Peaks, shall we say, of Rocks and Toys in the Attic. I think really the band were just starting to burn out. I mean, they had been touring non-stop. They had only stopped touring to make albums, and they'd been, burning the candle at both ends.
Draw the Line is a very good song. It's a terrific song. It's absolutely, one of my personal, top 10 Aerosmith songs. But the rest of the album is pretty shaky. For a very obvious reason, and that is they were doing loads and loads of drugs.
One thing Joe Perry said around the Draw the Line period, I think really summed up Aerosmith at that time. He said we were drug addicts dabbling in music rather than musicians dabbling in drugs.
The musicians did manage to put in a successful appearance in the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band movie and scored big with a cover of the Fab Four's Come Together. But otherwise, the future looked bleak.
Heat bag production, he got, oh, no double, he got, oh, not sideball, he won't, oh, the cracker, he got.
They were called in to do a Beatles-based film called Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And in that film, Aerosmith played the bad guys called the Future Villain Band. And as part of that, they recorded a cover of the Beatles' song Come Together. This was a very authentic sounding cover, I think. It adhered to the Beatles' song quite closely. It was grittier, it was more raw, a bit more muscular, but it became a live favourite.
What Aerosmith did is that they did the only smart thing they could do with Come Together, and they realised actually this Come Together was an Aerosmith song all along. They hardly had to rearrange it at all for it to sound like an Aerosmith song.
He roller coaster, he got early water, he got muddy water, he won mojo filter, he said, one and one is three. Got to be good looking 'cause it's so hard to see.
Faced with three problems, internal friction, critical irrelevance and substance dependency, the main songwriting team split and Perry left the band in 1979.
The reality of the thing is that each and every one of them, pretty much, to a lesser or greater extent, was turning into a thoroughly selfish drug monster. And as for Joe Perry, he was simply the first one to crack.
After recording 1979's Night in the Ruts, Perry was replaced by songwriter Richie Super and then by guitarist Jimmy Crespo of the band Flame. They soldiered on without Perry, who formed his own solo band, the Joe Perry Project. Night in the Ruts was a relative flop by Aerosmith standards, and it seemed the end was in sight for the band.
Joe Perry leaving, well, it was temporarily all over because there is no Aerosmith without Joe Perry. Would you pay to go and see the Rolling Stones without Keith Richards? Of course you wouldn't, It was hopeless, it just didn't work.
Although Aerosmith's Greatest Hits album was well received on its release in 1980, and the replacement of Brad Whitford by Rick Dufay didn't seem to slow the band down, the Rockin' a Hard Place album was another failure. To cap it all off, Tyler collapsed on stage in 1983. Rumours immediately spread that he was too far gone to recover and that Aerosmith's days as a meaningful creative act were numbered. However, in 1984, a miracle occurred.
Significantly, Joe Perry left his wife, Elisa, and kind of found himself out on a bit of a limb and began to reappraise what had gone on before with Aerosmith and kind of thought, well, hang on a minute, what the hell happened to me, these guys were my buddies. I'm not in this band anymore. What's going on? So I think that kind of really triggered the 1984 reunion.
It was their only option. Things had got so bad that Steven Tyler was living in the Gorham Hotel in New York City, and he was basically just going out and copping drugs and sitting in the hotel and doing them. Meanwhile, Brad Whitford's band hadn't really done much. He was looking to get back with Aerosmith, and Joe Perry had done 2 albums with the Joe Perry Project. They hadn't done well commercially. And later he said to me actually that the fact was he realised that they needed each other.
After the high-grossing Back in the Saddle tour, Aerosmith signed to Geffen Records and recorded 2 live albums, another greatest hits collection, and a new studio record done with mirrors. Although the album failed to sell well, lacking an obvious hit single, the real benefit of the sessions came when both Tyler and Perry completed rehab, the start of a journey which would see the so-called Toxic Twins remain sober for 22 years and counting.
I mean, these guys who had just lived this lifestyle for so long did come out clean, and as far as we know, they have stayed clean ever since. Their first act upon coming out of rehab was a collaboration with Run DMC on a kind of a hip-hop version of Walk This Way.
They brought rap and rock together in the most fantastic, visceral, seamless way. And it was also incredibly important for the comeback of Aerosmith, because a lot of people thought Aerosmith were dead in the water. And they'd forgotten how great they were. They'd forgotten that Walk This Way existed. A whole generation of people didn't even know that it had existed in the first place. And then suddenly, the hottest rap act in the world, probably, coming out of Rick Rubin's Def Jam stable, come along, and they do this Aerosmith song, which everybody had forgotten. And lo and behold, they've hardly had to touch it.
This was a fantastic move for Aerosmith. It really brought them back into the limelight, and importantly, it's exposed them to a new and much younger audience.
By 1987, Aerosmith were flying high once again. Their next album, Permanent Vacation, was the band's biggest selling album in over 10 years, selling over 5 million copies. Written with professional songwriters Desmond Child and Holly Knight, it contained 3 major hits that remain staples of their live set to date: Dude Looks Like a Lady, Ragdoll and Angel.
Backstage we're having the time of our lives until somebody said, well, forgive me if I seem out of line, and your whip down again tried to blow me. You look like a lady, yeah, you look like a lady.
Permanent Vacation was the dream comeback for Aerosmith. It was everything it needed to be and more. It was a very diverse album. It had quite a celebratory feel to it. You had the feel that this was a band that was back from the brink. They knew they were now on the verge of greater things. There was a real confidence to it.
It had strong songs, a cohesive sound. It had, if you like, a sense of an album identity about it, and it wasn't just, a bunch of songs which may or may not hang together.
Having had the success with Walk This Way, Aerosmith really became this all singing, all dancing band for the MTV generation that they hadn't been before.
They had their sweet melodies to blow the charts apart, and Joe Perry had these licks to, keep the heavy metal kids happy. Things like Dude Looks Like a Lady, it was fantastic. It was, they were back and it was incorrigible as ever.
It's a very saucy pop rocker. It's got off-kilter lyrics, a great chorus that everyone can sing. It's one of those songs that you hear on the radio all the time. It's still very much in the public consciousness. It's never really gone away.
Dude Looks Like a Lady was actually about Vince Neil of Motley Crue. It was written by Tyler about Vince. I think he'd gone into a bar somewhere and seen Vince surrounded by these, this bevy of beauties or whatever, and he kind of thought, well, hang on a minute, how's this guy, getting all the girls when he looks like one himself?
After hearing Dude Looks Like a Lady, you really felt that rock was back in safe hands. At the time, you had people like Bon Jovi and Def Leppard reigning supreme in the American charts with basically what was a watered-down hair metal version of what Aerosmith were. And they kind of said, oh, yeah, we're back now, you know, thanks for keeping the fans warm for us, but you know, you can go back to New Jersey or Sheffield or wherever you're from and we'll take over, thank you very much, which is pretty much what they did.
Another reason for the success of that album was that Aerosmith showed that they were willing to work with outside collaborators like Desmond Child, who gave them a little bit of stardust. But they also showed that they didn't need to do that, you know, with songs like Ragdoll, which was sort of quintessential R&B influenced Aerosmith in the tradition of Walk This Way.
Dude looked like a lady, swaggered because of the Joe Perry effect. Ragdoll was all swagger, you know, it really was all swagger. And once again, they were America's favourite hometown rock band.
A tour with Guns N' Roses, then just a snotty club act with their first album under their studded belt, seemed an obvious move for Aerosmith. Crowds flocked to see the incredible spectacle of the two premier rock bands sharing a stage, although it was rumoured that the headliners found Guns N' Roses' backstage behaviour difficult to deal with. After all, they themselves had recently moved away from the cocaine, heroin and Jack Daniels that Axl's band seemed to enjoy in such quantities. However, the tour was a great success and did much for the career of both bands at a time when they were being threatened by hundreds of other similar rock acts.
Guns N' Roses were a great band who needed to, as it were, meet the great American heartland to break out of their LA regional fan base. Aerosmith by then had recovered their whole kind of nationwide popularity. It was a great double-header show.
Guns N' Roses, for them, it was a dream come true. They were supporting a band that were their icons, and they were telling anybody that would listen at that time how much of an influence Aerosmith had been on their career, how their music simply would not exist without albums like Rocks. At the same time, Guns N' Roses were the hottest new band in the world. Appetite for Destruction is one of the greatest albums ever made. So for Aerosmith to be touring with Guns N' Roses was equally good for them, because it gave them a lot of kudos with younger fans.
In 1989, Aerosmith released the Pump album, which included even more hits. The thought-provoking Janie's Got a Gun, What It Takes, and the all-time classic Lovin' an Elevator. This song was based on a real-life incident in which Tyler was involved. In true rock star tradition, he'd encountered a couple of groupies in the lift of a hotel and didn't even bother inviting them back to his room before becoming, well, intimate with them.
Lovin' an Elevator is like a live favourite because it really is a tour de force. It's a riff-driven tour de force with Whitford and Perry really going at it hammer and tongs. And then at the front, you've got Steven Tyler, you know, being deliciously filthy as usual, you know, with all this going down business, which he really relishes saying. It sounds great coming from those capacious lips.
Just a really, really fun song that is indicative of the way Aerosmith were embracing life at this point, you know, and they were able to crank out these fairly off-the-cuff numbers, you know, that were pretty commercial, very memorable, but slightly throwaway as well.
Pump certainly is one of the kind of great rock records. It was another step on the way back from the dark days, and you know, Tyler's voice never sounded better. It was chemical free for the first time since the 60s.
Janie's Got a Gun, I think, is quite a serious song for Aerosmith, and basically it's about written by Tyler about a girl who kills her father because he has been sexually abusing her. So you know, some heavyweight lyrical stuff there from Aerosmith.
Shooting out of a gun, the dog may just be good. Everybody is on the run.
It's a very dark song. I don't think it's the sort of song that Aerosmith would have sat down and written saying, let's have a hit.
I think a fantastic piece of music, but perhaps Aerosmith not really the band to be tackling that kind of subject matter. You also have the autobiographical Monkey on My Back, which clearly was a song about Perry and Tyler's battles with addiction. I think the lyrics are, I had it all, then I blew it just to feed the monkey on my back. And where do you draw the line when all your friends are dying? It's them thinking about what might have been.
Monkey on My Back is another reason that Blue Collar America loves Tyler so much, is because he's very honest. You know, he will talk about drugs. It's not something he's tried to hide under the carpet. He's very honest, he's very straightforward talking, and America loves him because he is one of their own.
It's a statement of intent, really, you know, about the new cleaned up Aerosmith, you know, with none of this baggage now, you know, just forging ahead into the future.
With songs such as this, it was little wonder that Pump went on to sell 7 million copies, even though the critics disliked its alleged similarities to the hair metal movements of the era.
Pump really stands out from the hair metals of the day because of the breadth of the band's vision. It wasn't just all surface. It wasn't just production and nothing else. It wasn't keyboard heavy. The guitars were really crunching like guitars used to crunch. And in a way, it was showing the way forward.
This was actually as good, if not better, than Permanent Vacation. It had a very different sound to Permanent Vacation. It wasn't as diverse or as celebratory, but it was more raw and sinewy, more muscular. The guitars of Perry and Whitford were much higher in the mix.
They've become almost like elder statesmen, you know, with Pump, and they were producing albums of great quality, and they were taking their time over them, and obviously they didn't have the drug problems of the past.
After a break, Aerosmith took a giant leap towards mainstream chart territory, where they've remained ever since. 1993's Get a Grip album was chock full of hits, including Living on the Edge and Eat the Rich. The power ballad quotient was too high for some, although Crying, Crazy and Amazing were enormous hits on MTV, not least thanks to the presence in each video of the then unknown actress Alicia Silverstone.
People look at Crying, they look at Crazy, they look at Amazing, and they say, oh, there's a plethora of ballads on this album. You know, they're accusing Aerosmith of selling out again. But, you know, keep up with the program, you know. They're not selling out, they never sold in. Dream On was what got us here in the first place with Aerosmith. Ballads have always been a very, very strong part of what they do.
It's a bit difficult for the Aerosmith purists, however, because these songs are primetime fodder. This is radio rock. These are the kind of songs that you get in Hollywood movies. One or two are fine and possibly quite moving. These are pretty decent songs, but Aerosmith just did one after the other. They just didn't seem to know when to stop. Eat the Rich was the song that it opened with, which is one of those great gas-guzzling rocking openers, which became a really classic opener for Aerosmith on that tour.
Eat the Rich was a perfect example of really blazing modern rock and roll, and I think it was the first point where people started to notice that they actually had surpassed the Rolling Stones for the first time.
Living on the edge, you can't help yourself at all. Living on the edge, you can't help yourself from falling. Tell me what you think about your situation. Complication, aggravation is getting to you.
The standout track to me is Living on the Edge, particularly because of its lyrical content. It was written about the LA riots, the Rodney King thing in the 90s. So, you know, that's got a message above and beyond, you know, what you would normally associate with Aerosmith.
It was Aerosmith once again finding the stride that they'd had with rocks, I guess, for the first time. But on this occasion, they had no intention of throwing it all away by misbehaving. They really were in a position to become the greatest rock and roll band in America, if not the world.
This again has a great chorus that's easy to pick up on, easy to sing, very radio friendly. However, it was a little bit middle of the road, a little bit repetitive. I think it went on for a little bit too long. In retrospect, it may have been the start of the tradition they had for producing rather bland material, which they've had a bit of criticism for, you know, in the years since then.
Aerosmith songs haven't exactly evolved very much. They're not that kind of band, and Aerosmith really are, you know, have been for years now pretty much in the business of just fine-tuning the formula, of just maintaining the groove, finding new ways to rearrange that old riff.
Albums and tours have continued to reinforce the Aerosmith legend, and the musicians are now celebrities in their own right. In 2005, for example, Tyler starred in the film Be Cool with John Travolta, while Joe Perry released a self-titled solo album. Whatever happens to Aerosmith, one thing's for sure: they earned their success through their phenomenal live act. When a band as powerful and talented as this walk on stage, absolutely anything can happen.
You can't help yourself from
I went on the road with Aerosmith in '98, and it was still the great hells-a-popping, eye-popping scenes that you imagine of going on the road with the Stones back in the 70s, or Zeppelin back in the 70s. It's astounding, you know, they operate on a completely different level.
The Aerosmith live performance is probably now as good as it was during their heyday. It's doubtless a little bit less energetic, because in 2008 Steven Tyler will be 60 and he is already a granddad, so we're not going to be seeing him doing many backflips these days, I don't think. But if you go back to 93, 94, when they were at their height of commercial success on the Get a Grip tour, you were seeing 100% total Aerosmith.
I'll go to see Aerosmith at the drop of a hat. You know, if they're playing tomorrow, I'd be there. You know, I think that's a measure of their longevity and their heritage and their current standing.